here with the spanner. Oh, hey there! Maintenance is required in this episode of Battle Guides, featuring Runika. Runika is an all-around character who has an amazing early game due to the stats that her unique ability gives her. This, mixed in with her plethora of styles and effects, give her a lot of utility when it comes to dealing with her opponents. There are, of course, some drawbacks. Despite having amazing stats, she doesn't have a lot of mobility, making hitting the opponent quite hard sometimes. Also, the opponent is able to deactivate your artifacts, meaning that you get weaker as the game goes on if you don't properly manage your artifacts using your effects. As such, playing Runika isn't just about using your superior stats, it's also about properly managing your artifacts. Runika's unique ability is Artifice. She starts the game off with 5 artifacts that all give her varying bonuses. Whenever she is hit by the opponent, before any on-hit, on-damage, or other effects apply, the opponent can deactivate 1 artifact of his or her choice. Now, this unique ability might sound simple, but the majority of her artifacts provide her so many great stats that I believe deserve special mention. So I'll go over her artifacts before her styles. First off are Phase Goggles, which give Runika range plus 0 to 1 on all of her attacks. This proves to be amazing as it increases your effective range by 1 space all the time. Considering that all of your styles have plus 0 range, this proves to be quite useful when it comes to hitting your opponent. Second, and probably one of the most feared, is Hover Boots, which gives Runika plus 2 priority on all of her attacks. Given that most of her attacks have priority plus 0 or minus 1, this means that you'll be outspeeding most of your opponents. Number 3, the Auto Deflector gives Runika Soak 2. Due to the nature of this, your opponent usually deactivates this one first, which proves to be useful as it means you'll get to preserve your other artifacts, such as the Hover Boots or the Phase Goggles. Number 4, the Battle Fist gives Runika power plus 1 on all of her attacks. Now this might not seem big, but you'll realize that it piles on as the game continues. So if your opponent doesn't deactivate this fast, they'll soon notice that their life trickles a little bit too often. And number 5, the Shield Amulet gives Runika Stun Guard 3 on all of her attacks. Now if your opponent decides to deactivate the Auto Deflector, this artifact still lets Runika run through majority of the opponent's attacks. Notice how most opponents can only deal 3 damage in a single beat. Use that to your advantage. As you can see, Runika has all of these bonuses at the start of the game, giving her one of the most feared early games in all of BattleCON. However, as the game progresses, your opponent will start getting hits in, deactivating your most prominent artifacts. As such, it is up to you to properly manage and reactivate them as the game goes on. Due to the nature of her artifacts, Runika's game plan goes pretty much like this. In the early game, she uses her superior stats to brawl with the opponent and create an early lead. During the mid-game, Runika tries to maintain her lead while managing her artifacts. And during the late game, she starts sacrificing most of her artifacts in order to secure the win. As such, playing Runika is all about managing your artifacts and knowing which ones to give up in order to maintain the lead or secure the victory. Explosive is a great style that has a lot of potential power. Its start to beat effect allows Runika to pull the opponent 1 space, while its on-hit effect allows Runika to spend or discard an artifact in order to get power plus 2. That means if you choose to deactivate something that isn't the Battle Fist, this style ends up giving Runika an effective power plus 2 instead of a power plus 1. Although it has 4 stats in range and priority, remember that you still have your Phase Goggles and your Hover Boots to back it up. As such, I suggest pairing this with Drives in order to increase your effective range, or Strikes in order to maximize your damage. Impact is a brawling style that lets Runika close the gap and push opponents away from retaliation range. By putting your opponent out of retaliation range, they won't be able to hit you, meaning that you get to keep an artifact this beat, which is amazing for maintaining your artifacts. Now, I highly suggest pairing this with Grasp, not only for its speed, but also for the extra movement or drives in order to give it better hit confirm. Maintenance is a godsend in mid and late game, especially if your opponent has predicted you a number of times, as it gives you soak equal to the number of deactivated artifacts you have. This gives you time to recuperate and hopefully regain your artifacts and regain your lead. This also lets you create distance using its after activating effect, which proves to be quite useful if you're trying to dodge enemies. I suggest pairing this with shots in order to synergize well with the extra soak, or Tinker in order to let you get back your much needed artifacts. Channeled is a style that allows you to reactivate a much needed artifact at the start of the beat, at 2 costs. Number 1, when your opponent hits you, that artifact gets disabled, no matter what, as your opponent doesn't get to choose anymore. Number 2, at the end of the beat, you have to deactivate another artifact. As such, it's either a 1-for-1 or a 1-for-2, so be careful when using this style. However, these effects basically mean that your opponent doesn't get to pick which artifact gets deactivated. As such, you can use it to preserve really important artifacts if you desperately need them. I usually pair this attack with drives and grasps, as they are the fastest bases that Runika has. This basically lets Runika have the bigger chance of stunning her opponent and negating the loss of another artifact. Finally, Overcharge lets Runika overcharge one of her artifacts, letting her activate a superior version of that artifact's bonus, at the cost of losing that artifact for the rest of the game. Like Channeled, your opponent can still hit you to deactivate another artifact. However, Overcharge doesn't have the benefit of letting you pick which one your opponent deactivates. As such, if you make a mistake, this style will leave you gasping for air. Use this style sparingly and use it in the late game, when you need to secure beats to win. The thing with this attack pair is that I can't give you guys any good bases to pair with it, because it really depends on which artifact you decide to overcharge. As such, my biggest advice for this card is to simply know which bonuses fit with which bases. One example would be overcharging phase goggles while using strike. And finally, we have Tinker. This is Runika's only way of activating an artifact without deactivating another one in return. It also has the added bonus of making sure that the activated artifact does not get deactivated this beat. It may have mediocre stats, but it has Stun Guard 3, letting Runika brunt through most attacks even if she's not faster. When it comes to pairing this with specific styles, I suggest pairing it with Channeled to offset the net loss of artifacts, or Impact in order to hopefully preserve your artifact count. Runika's 2 overdrive finishers are Artifice Avarice and Udstad Beam. Artifice Avarice is a mediocre overdrive finisher. In terms of stats, you see it only has range 1, power 3, and priority 3. But a majority of its power comes from its start of beat effect. Its start of beat effect allows Runika to activate all of her artifacts while overcharging one of them. Now this means 2 things. Number 1, you get to reactivate all of your artifacts, allowing you to come back if you're losing severely. Number 2, the overcharge means that you get to see your opponent's attack pair and then select which of your artifacts will let you win that beat. As such, Artifice Avarice proves to be one of the best overdrive finishers in all of BattleCON, as it technically eliminates having to predict what your opponent is doing. On the other hand, Udstad Beam is a long-range overdrive finisher that deals a lot of damage but has low priority, which is offset by its stun immunity. However, note that none of your artifacts as bonuses apply to this attack. As such, what you see is what you get. This serves as a remedy to Runika's lack of range and effective range, letting her hit opponents that are far away. Now, looking at all of her options for overdrive finishers, there is no doubt in my mind that Artifice Avarice is the way to go when using your special action. Not only does it let you regain all of your artifacts, it also technically lets you win a beat for free at almost no cost. Now let's move on to everybody's favorite part, advanced strategies. Now here's the problem with Runika. It's not that much of an advanced strategy. You see, Runika's main game plan really is to just create a large gap of life in the early game, maintain her bonuses throughout the mid game, so that late game she can use overcharge to execute her opponent. As such, the key to playing Runika is always learning how to preserve your artifacts. Artifacts are your life and blood. If playing a weaker attack means that you don't lose an artifact, I always highly suggest using that instead of an attack that deals more damage at the cost of an artifact. That being said, moves such as Explosive, Channeled, and Overcharge might seem too risky at the start of the game. Remember that you always have one of the most feared early games in the game. Your beat 1 turns out to be one of the most amazing and one of the most threatening beat 1s in the game as well. Use that to your advantage to establish an early lead, allowing you to make more mistakes in the mid game when you're maintaining your artifacts. And by the time you reach end game, make sure that if you have to lose an artifact, don't lose the ones that give you priority, range, and power, as these become absolutely vital in the end game to execute your opponent and secure the victory. Remember, Runika is all about managing your artifacts. Don't be afraid to lose a little life. Don't be afraid to lose positioning. Don't be afraid to lose beats if it means gaining the artifacts that you need. And now on the subject of combos, I'll give you one combo or one attack pair for each phase of the game that I believe wraps up what each phase of Runika's game plan should be. Now, for the early game, I suggest using Explosive Drive. Knowing that all of your artifacts are pretty much active at this time, this attack turns into our technical range 1 to 5, power 3, priority 6 attack, with the added benefit of letting you make it a power 5 attack instead. This attack lets you establish an early lead with little to no prediction on your part, which sums up what Runika's early game is all about. Deal a lot of damage and deal it quick. Second, during the mid game, we have Impact Tinker. Impact Tinker is really amazing as it lets Runika hit the opponent, hopefully pushing the opponent out of retaliation range, allowing Runika to keep her artifacts. Mixed in with Tinker's ability to regain an artifact, this attack pair lets Runika regain the artifacts that she will need in the end game. And that's pretty much what Runika's mid game is all about. It's all about brawling and skirting around your opponents, whittling his HP to lower values so that you can execute them easily later on. And finally, for Runika's end game, I present Overcharged Drive. Overcharged Drive might not seem like the best attack, but actually it is one of the most amazing attacks in the entirety of Devastation. You see, its start to beat effect allows you to overcharge one of your artifacts. Remember what I said about Artificer Avarice? It's the same here. This basically lets you win the entire beat without having to predict your opponent, as long as you have the proper artifacts to do so. I chose Drive to pair with Overcharge because it has pretty much some of everything. It deals decent damage, it has great priority, and it has amazing effective range. Now, all of Drive's stats might seem mediocre, but if you choose to overcharge the proper artifacts, that mediocre will turn into monstrous. Only need to deal 6 damage to execute the opponent. Overcharge the Battle Fist. Need to outspeed that opponent playing that really fast dash or really fast grasp. Overcharge your Hover Boots. What's that? Your opponent's about to hit you with a really strong overdrive? Overcharge your Auto Deflector. You see that because of the start to beat effect, you get to counter a lot of your opponent's options without even having to think about it. So, with that in mind, play this attack the moment you see the opening, and you'll win the game. And that pretty much does it for this episode of Battle Guides, featuring Runika. And if you want to take this glorious artificer to the battlefield, I suggest that you listen to these few last-minute tips. Number 1, artifacts. Artifacts are completely important to your game. It's all about managing and knowing which artifacts to trade for. Remember that some artifacts aren't useful in certain matchups. For example, hover boots might not be as useful against faster opponents, like Schecter or Demetros. As such, you can easily trade for it when using Channeled. Number 2, remember your game plan. Deal a lot of damage early, maintain your artifacts mid-game, and then execute your opponent in the late game. Although this might seem predictable, it's actually one of the most effective ways for Runika to win the game. Any other way would seem counterproductive, as trying to expend all of your moves on overcharged early game would mean that you lack the ability to execute late game. This game plan pretty much makes use of Runika's specific abilities and specific bonuses at specific times of the game when they're most relevant. You use her superior stats in the early game when they're all active. You use her plethora of regaining effects in mid-game when you need them for the late game. And of course, you use her desperation styles in the end game to execute your opponents. Because even though they have a lot of cost, that cost won't matter because you've won the game. Finally, your special action. Remember when you're losing and you have a lot of lost life and none of your artifacts are active, remember that you can still always count on Artificer Avarice to come back in the game. As such, for Runika, more than a majority of the cast, it's paramount that you never, ever forget to use your special action, as it could mean the difference between a win and the loss. And that pretty much does it for this episode of Battle Guides. Thank you so much, my loving subscribers, for commenting, liking, and sharing the video last time, even though I didn't really ask you guys to share. Anyway, as you can see in the background, I've gotten my copy of Devastation with the amazing playmat, Devastation Extended Edition, Strikers, War Revised Edition, and look at the box. It is an amazing game, and I've wasted over 5 hours on it already with my friends. Now, if you guys are interested in getting this stuff, look at Level 99 Games' store and website for more information. It's down there in the links below. And if you want to talk to me or any of the other BattleCON veterans, come join us on the forum at worldofindines.com or boardgamegeek.com. We will talk you down and we will give you more tips. Don't worry, we're an amazing community. Again, thank you so much. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can put them down there below. I read them all the time. Remember, at the end of this video, you can still vote for which character gets a video next. Just click on the chibi of your choice, and if you're brought to my channel, your vote has been counted. And now that that's done and over with, never forget your special action. Thank you so much, World of Indines. Thank you, and good night.